Have you ever stared at the ocean and realized you were looking at a bank vault? Floating out there, miles from civilization, are steel leviathans. They're longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall and heavier than the Empire State Building. They move slowly, barely 15 knots, yet they determine the speed of your life. They determine the price of your commute, the cost of your food, and, most terrifyingly, the value of the money in your pocket. We're told that the global economy runs on high-frequency trading, fiber optic cables, and digital transactions that happen in nanoseconds. This is a lie. The real global economy is heavy, it is rusty, it is slow, and it is incredibly fragile. This is the supertanker, a vessel that doesn't just carry crude oil, it carries the lifeblood of the US dollar. These ships are the physical manifestation of the global financial system. And right now, the system is glitching. What happens when these ships stop moving? What happens when the floating pipeline that connects the Middle East to the West gets clogged? The answer isn't just a gas shortage. It is a financial heart attack. Today, we're diving into the Petro-Dollar Cycle to understand how these rust-covered giants hold global finance hostage.
This is Finance Beyond Seas. We explore the moments where the currents of maritime history and the tides of the global economy collide. We're here to navigate the wreckage of the past, to find the financial lessons that will protect you today. We analyze history and systems, not futures. Nothing presented here is financial advice. It is purely historical and economic commentary.
To understand why a ship can bankrupt a nation, we have to go back to the moment the world became addicted to liquid energy. After World War II, the global powers made a silent pact. Coal was the past. Oil was the future. But there was a geographical curse. The oil wasn't where the industry was. It was buried under the sands of the Middle East, thousands of miles away from the factories of Europe and the highways of America. This necessitated the greatest logistical experiment in human history, moving a liquid continent across the ocean every single day. The turning point was the Suez Crisis of 1956. When the canal was blocked, the short route from the Middle East to Europe was severed. Suddenly, ships had to go all the way around Africa, past the Cape of Good Hope. The journey was too long for standard ships to be profitable. The solution? Overnight, naval architects went mad with scale. They coined the term VLCC, Very Large Crude Carrier. These weren't just ships, they were floating reservoirs. But the real locking mechanism clicked into place in the 1970s. President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. The dollar became fiat, backed by nothing but trust. To ensure that trust, the U.S. made a deal with Saudi Arabia: sell oil only in dollars. From that moment on, every tanker leaving the Persian Gulf wasn't just exporting energy, it was exporting demand for the U.S. dollar. The tanker became the physical vessel of the world's reserve currency. Here is where the flawless design begins to crack. Storing oil on land is expensive. Building massive tanks costs millions and takes up valuable real estate. So, the geniuses of Wall Street and logistics decided on a risky efficiency. Let the ocean be the warehouse. At any given moment, a massive percentage of the world's oil supply is not in a tank on land, it is floating on the water. This is efficient, yes, but it creates a systemic vulnerability known as the floating storage trap. Normally, a tanker picks up oil and delivers it, point A to point B. But what happens when the financial markets flip? Introduce the concept of contango. This is a market condition where the price of oil in the future is expected to be much higher than the price today. When this happens, traders tell the ships to stop. Don't deliver the oil, they say. Park the ship in the middle of the ocean and wait. Suddenly, these logistical assets transform into speculative financial assets. The ship anchors, The crew waits, the oil sits there effectively removed from the market. This artificially tightens supply, driving prices up for you, the consumer, while traders wait for their profit margins to fatten. This is financialized logistics. The physical movement of goods is no longer determined by who needs fuel to keep the lights on. It is determined by the spread on a futures contract in Chicago or London. The ocean becomes a parking lot, and the global economy starts to suffocate. Let's look at two recent events where this system failed spectacularly. First, the financial glitch of April 2020. When the pandemic hit, demand for oil collapsed to zero, but oil wells kept pumping. Within weeks, every land-based storage tank in the world was full. The price of oil turned negative. Producers were paying people $37 a barrel to take the oil away. In that chaos, the only winners were the owners of supertankers. Daily charter rates for a VLCC skyrocketed from $25,000 to over $200,000 a day. Why? Because traders weren't hiring them to move oil. They were hiring them to act as expensive floating buckets. The ocean was dotted with stationary giants holding billions of dollars of inventory, waiting for the world to restart. But today, we face a more violent example. The Red Sea crisis. Since late 2023, we have seen a stark asymmetry. Cheap $20,000 drones launched by militia groups are targeting $100 million tankers carrying billions in cargo. Major energy companies like BP and Shell stopped sailing through the Suez Canal. They forced their tankers to take the long way around Africa, adding 10 to 14 days to the journey and burning 40% more fuel. This creates a terrifying multiplier effect. When a voyage takes 2 weeks longer, that ship is occupied for longer. It can't go back to pick up the next load. Suddenly, there is a global shortage of available ships. Freight rates explode. Insurance premiums spike by 300%. Who pays for that extra fuel, that extra time, and that panic? You do. This is how a geopolitical conflict in a narrow strait instantly translates into inflation at your local grocery store. The tanker is no longer just a delivery truck, it's a target. Why do governments allow this fragility? Why rely on slow ships and narrow straits? From the perspective of the United States, this system is a feature, not a bug. Control over the sea lines of communication is the ultimate source of American power, more so than nuclear weapons. The U.S. Navy guarantees the safety of these tankers. In exchange, the world trades in dollars. This is the implicit contract. However, for a rising power like China, this is a nightmare. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. Roughly 80% of China's energy imports must pass through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow channel between Malaysia and Indonesia. If a conflict breaks out, the U.S. doesn't need to invade China. They simply need to park a destroyer at the entrance of the strait and wait. The tankers stop. The lights in Shanghai go out in weeks. The factories stop. This strategic reality drives long-term planning. It is why China is building the Belt and Road overland routes to bypass the ocean. It is why the U.S. maintains such a heavy presence in the Persian Gulf. The strategy is a tension between flow and choke. The global economy needs flow to grow, but superpowers need choke points to rule. The tanker is the chess piece caught in the middle. History is screaming at us, if we care to listen. This pattern of a superpower relying on a vulnerable long-distance supply chain is not new. Look at ancient Rome. Rome was a city of 1 million people, but it couldn't feed itself. It relied entirely on the cura annone, the grain fleet from Egypt and North Africa. The emperor's power didn't come from the Senate. It came from the bread provided by these ships. Just like today's oil tankers, the Roman grain fleet was a marvel of logistics. They built massive super freighters for the time, the navis honoraria. But whenever storms, pirates, or rival empires disrupted this fleet, Rome panicked. Riots broke out. Emperors were assassinated. The price of grain in Rome was the price of oil today. It was the master variable of political stability. When the Vandals captured North Africa and cut off the grain shipment, the Western Roman Empire didn't just get hungry, it collapsed. We are living in the same dynamic. We have swapped grain for oil and wooden hulls for steel, but the vulnerability remains exactly the same. We are one major blockade away from systemic chaos. Let's connect the final dots. How does the ship affect the money in your bank account? It comes down to the petrodollar feedback loop. Because oil is priced in dollars, when oil prices rise, perhaps because tankers are diverting around Africa or used as storage, the world needs more dollars to buy the same amount of energy. Countries like Japan, India, or Turkey must sell their own currency to buy dollars to pay for the oil. Tanker supply tightens, oil price goes up, global demand for US dollars explodes. The dollar gets stronger. Other currencies get weaker, importing inflation. This is the cruelty of the system. A supply shock in logistics acts like a tax on the rest of the world, paid to the United States. Furthermore, this loop creates a liquidity trap. When billions of dollars are tied up in oil floating on the ocean, that capital isn't moving. It's not investing, it's not building factories, it is stagnant. The tanker market is the canary in the coal mine for global recession. When you see rates for these ships crash, it means demand is dead. When you see them spike, it means inflation is coming. They are the pulse of the patient. Currently, with the fragmentation of global trade and the weaponization of trade routes, this loop is straining. Countries are looking for alternatives, but for now, the dollar and the tanker remain locked in a dangerous dance. Here is the ultimate paradox. We are racing toward a green future. We talk about solar panels, EVs, and hydrogen. But the transition to that future is being powered, financed, and physically moved by the very dinosaurs we're trying to kill, the diesel-burning supertankers. We cannot build the new world without the energy provided by the old one. But as the petrodollar system frays and as the choke points become militarized zones, the ocean is becoming dangerous again. The insight is this: the era of easy movement is over. We treated the ocean like a free highway for 70 years. Now it is becoming a toll road, guarded by navies and exploited by traders. The next time you see a gas price spike, don't just blame the politician on TV. Close your eyes and picture a rusty steel giant floating in silence, holding your economy hostage. If you want to understand how the world truly works, you have to look at the plumbing, not just the facade. If you enjoyed this journey across the high seas of finance, hit subscribe. We're just scratching the surface.